We are in lesson 5 of our series talking about basically biblical human history. We've been talking about through the book of Genesis. We've been taking a survey approach. We haven't been necessarily stopping and parsing out great details, but we're just trying to refresh our understanding and remembrances of basic history that God unfolds before us within Scripture. In fact, just from we talked the other day that in the first 12 chapters or so of the book of Genesis, you're covering roughly 2,000 years worth of history. And so you think about that, how quickly could you read those first 11 chapters up to Abraham's covenant in chapter 12? It wouldn't take you long to read it at all. But that's all that God chose to reveal to us as it concerns that first roughly 2,000 years of human history. And so just in some senses, as God took a survey approach to that time period, we did the same as we moved through. We're in lesson 5. You have those lesson sheets in front of you there. We're in lesson 5 of that series. I'll show it to you on the screen as well. And because we had the break last week, let me just kind of refresh us a little bit, get us up to speed to who we're talking about. Especially when you get into the New Testament and they talk about God, and they would say the God of whom? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you've got these three prominent figures that repeatedly the promises of God are extended to. Abraham hears the covenant first in chapter 12, then he hears it again in chapter 15, and then he hears it again in chapter 17 or 18. I'm just jogging my own memory a little bit, Gary, as well. And then that is passed on to Isaac, right? If you look in there, look at question 5 in your lesson sheets. Actually, question 4 to begin with. What did Abraham do which caused God to establish his covenant with him? Okay, which was obedience, right? It's the idea of obedience unto God, and then God extends the promises that were made to Abraham unto Isaac for Abraham's sake. For Abraham's sake. In other words, he didn't necessarily equate Isaac's faith and commitment to that of his father, Abraham's. In fact, you begin to appreciate even by the time you get from Abraham to Isaac, there's already a decline in commitment. And then when you get to Jacob, you've got a whole other set of issues. But God's made a covenant. He's made a promise. There doesn't seem to be any ambiguity to it. And so that covenant and promise that he made to Abraham is going to be fulfilled in many senses, irregardless of the behavior of those who may happen to be in the lineage at some point in time. And so that promise is extended unto Isaac. Its promise is extended to then ultimately Jacob. Those three men are the prominent figures that we're often reminded of within Scripture as it relates to this covenant promise of God. And it had varying principles to it. What's the ultimate purpose of the covenant? Jesus, right? The ultimate purpose of the covenant is to create a lineage that will ultimately allow for Jesus to arrive. Are there other aspects to the covenant that actually get kind of given to us piece by piece? What are some of those? Okay, so you're going to have a great multitude of a nation. What else did he promise them? Land. So those were the two primary things outside of the lineage that leads to Jesus that were promised to Abraham, and those promises are continuing to be understood and brought forth as a result of that covenant, even through Jacob. Now, Jacob had a brother. What was his name? Esau. And what was the issue between Jacob and Esau? Okay, so Esau sells his birthright to his brother, which in some senses wasn't necessarily entirely his to what? His to get, right? It wasn't necessary, because who's ultimately got to extend that blessing? The father, which is Isaac. And so though Esau, for a small bowl of pottage or soup, whatever you want to call it, stew, he's willing to sell that right off to Jacob, but they still have to convince Isaac of that. And so they just walk in there, and Isaac's a willing participant in that. No, that's not right, is it? What actually happens? Okay, so let's get that picture in first. So who's the mother of Jacob? Okay, so Rebecca steps in, okay, and she cooks the same food that Esau normally cooked for his father. She dresses Jacob up, puts some hair on him and they deceive Isaac, who at this point is older and can't see, right? And in that scene, Isaac kind of notices what? Yeah, voice is off, right? He gets it. There's something not right here, but all the other factors seem to point that this is Esau that I'm dealing with. And let's give Isaac the benefit of the doubt here in relationship to the idea that you and I have probably been in circumstances where maybe 2 or 3 of the senses or circumstances seem to point in a certain way. There might be that one little thing, you kind of rationalize it away and say, well, no, it's got to be because here are these other elements that seem right. And so Isaac gives in. He ultimately blesses Jacob. That becomes a what between Jacob and Esau then? A sense of contention and animosity between the two. In some ways, you might argue that Esau doesn't have any argument, right? Because he had already basically committed that to Jacob from his side already. But the brothers aren't necessarily in great relationship at all as it relates to those things. And even though deception was used, Isaac said, I made a promise, I made a covenant, and I intend to honor that. And so ultimately, these promises are going to be extended unto Jacob as well, and he will receive the benefit from that. All right, so let's pick up, just trying to remind us of enough that we can kind of get it back into this study. So let's pick up in part 4 where it says Jacob's return to Canaan. And let me just give you again a refresher since we've been off for a couple weeks. So what happens with Jacob after that then? Where's he sent? Okay, he's sent to his uncle Laban, right? He's sent to Laban for what purpose? Get a wife. Oh, if it was only that simple in contemporary times, right? Just send them on down there, go get you one, and come on back. But that's the kind of the way it was. You go down to your uncle Laban. That sounds odd to us even saying that. But they go down there, and so he finds one that he likes, and who's she? Rachel, right? It's Rachel. So he likes Rachel. He makes a covenant with Laban that he'll do what? He'll work 7 years and to receive the hand of Rachel. That 7 years passes, but he is duped and receives Leah instead. And because of that, he isn't real happy about that, obviously. So he enters into another covenant. Again, I made this statement a couple weeks ago. I believe he receives Rachel immediately, but he commits to staying another. Okay, so yeah, you're right. And so it wasn't the full 7 years. He commits to the 7 years, but receives her basically immediately as his wife. But there's a problem. What's that basic problem? Right, Rachel is having problems having any children, and so Leah begins to gain some favor because she's able to bear children. We'll look at that list of children again. We ran them real quick a couple of weeks ago, kind of out of order in the lesson. I'll run them again at the end of the lesson when we get to that point this morning. Because there's going to be, so Leah's going to have children. Rachel gets upset and gives her handmaid, right? And so that kind of she could have children for him. Leah kind of hadn't been having any more kids, so she gives a handmaid to kind of then Rachel, and then so and you're back and forth and back and forth. And we'll look at all those children before we're done this morning. So is Laban real excited about the idea that Jacob is going to leave with two of his daughters and all this heritage and grandkids. No, he's not. He's not real excited about that idea. And yet, God's intention all along is for him to return. Let's go into chapter 31 of the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 31. And let's look at the first few verses here. Now that we've kind of got that all that fresh back into our minds. So he hears or heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all this glory. So why is there contention between Jacob and Laban's sons and Jacob? Why is there this? Okay, so right, so because God is blessing whom? Jacob, but who's getting the side benefit of that, if you will? Laban and his heritage, right? Because Jacob is serving under the household of Laban, God's blessing Jacob, and in so doing, he's blessing Laban. But they don't see it that way. They see it as Jacob is blessing under the guidance and household of Laban. They don't see it the other way around. They see it as though Jacob has taken advantage of the great fortune that Laban's been experiencing, and now he wants to what? Gather it all up and run away with it, and they're not happy about it. So Jacob beholds, verse 2, the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. All right? Well, as long as you're standing here working, son, and you're building a prosperity for me, have at it. The minute he begins to think about the idea that I'm going to head back to my homeland, Laban's whole disposition towards Jacob changes. And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. Just curiosity whether you catch anything about this or not. But what's that sound a little bit like in this history we've been talking about? Exactly. Abraham, you've been blessed. Been here in the Ur of Chaldees. You've had the benefit of being in these familial, in that common area, and things might be well. But I need you to leave and go to a place that I will show you. I want you to leave the comfortable and trust that I'm going to bless you. I want you to leave that which seems easy right now. I want you to trust and have faith that what I'm leading you to will be better. Would it be tempting for Jacob just to not want the hassle and just say, you know what, I'll just stay here? Wouldn't that be the easier path? It'd been a lot easier choice, right? I'll just stay right here. Why go through all the trouble? Number one, who wants to drag all these kids, right? All the way, you got a minivan with a video system in it. He's got to take them by foot, right? All the way back. So just put your mind there for a minute. And the challenges of that. My father-in-law will be much happier. All my brother-in-laws, they're going to get off my case if I just stay put. Seems like a simpler thing. But he's going to have to trust the last words of verse 3. He's going to have to trust that God's promise, you go back to Canaan, go back to the promised land, and I'll bless you. I'll be with you. And Jacob's got to make a choice. So, Jacob does what in verse 4? All right, so he calls Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock. And he says to them, I see your father's countenance that is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And you know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father hath deceived me, which is true, and changed my wages 10 times. 10 different times has there been conflict between the two. But God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he thus, the ringstraked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstraked. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. In other words, Jacob says to Rachel and Leah, listen, your father may be upset with me, but one minute he thinks that, well, it's because you've got all the speckled animals. Okay, you take it. Well, what about the other time? Well, no, you take those then. And each time they switched, God would switch which ones were being benefited. Jacob always seemed to come out on top, and that was creating conflict. But ultimately, what does Jacob do? Ultimately, he what? He leaves. Ultimately leaves. And so as he heads back, you think about the difficulties he's going to experience along the way, and really, who I guess in some senses is going to be a hurdle he's going to have to get past through all of this. Okay, so and word gets out, right? And so it's interesting. They don't have modern communication, but as you travel with such an entourage, and you're not just going with your family, you're taking what with you? All that prosperity's with you, right? So this is a pretty sizable, group of things, animals and people, and all you'd have to do is probably pass by one or two people along the way, and they would say, "Oh, we saw Jacob, and he's the son-in-law of Laban. Well, looks like they're," and word would spread. So Esau, right? They know they're on in Jacob's mind. They're on a kind of a head-on disastrous collision, and he's not so sure how he's going to respond, react, or what he's going to do. Of course, he doesn't know the mindset of Esau at this point. And so, yet he heads out to fulfill those promises. How long had he been away? Yeah, go to verse 38 of Genesis chapter 31. Notice he said, "This 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten." I've worked for you for 20 years, and I've not taken advantage of you or tried to abuse this privilege. I've done what's honorable, though Laban had not been honorable at all. Jacob says, "I have," but for 20 years. And so you would hope that after 20 years that Jacob and Esau can what? Yeah, get past this, right? You would hope, right? 20 years have gone by. It's time, right? It's time to put away whatever happened 20 years ago that sent Jacob. Well, we know what it was, but you understand what I'm saying. 20 years is plenty long to hold animosity and to hold difficulties among them. And so he says, for 20 years I've been gone, and I've done everything honorable, but I'm going to obey the commands of God and the vow he had made. Notice verse 13 if you back up, same chapter. He said, "I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred." What happened there, by the way, at Bethel with Jacob? Say, I'm sorry, I'm hearing two or three different things. Okay, is that not? I'm trying to. He's going to wrestle with the Jabbok River in chapter 32. But I think this is a reference to when he has that dream like, and he sees that ladder, and at that point he makes a covenant with God. And so basically now by the time you get to this point in the history, God says, "All right, Jacob, you remember Bethel? You remember the covenant and vow you made? It's time to honor it." And that vow was not that you would be away forever. That vow was you're going to go back, you're going to fulfill the promises that were made and the covenant that was made, and you're going to have to go back to Canaan. So finally, after all this time, he's reminded of that vow that he made there at Bethel, and it's time to head home. And so he begins the departure. But along the way, as we said earlier, he's going to have to wrestle, in some senses, with two different people. He's going to have to wrestle with God and he's going to have to wrestle with whatever happens with his brother in that relationship. And so just put your mind into that setting for a minute. So Jacob leaves, been tremendously prosperous because of the blessings God had given him. But he doesn't leave on great terms. Right? Laban's mad. Brother-in-laws are mad. He's got to get all his family convinced that we're going to do this. We're going to honor the promises of God. But he also knows when he goes that he's most likely going to run into Esau, and so he's going to have to deal with that. It's quite a burden that Jacob is carrying. Now, some of it brought on himself, right? With some of the choices and decisions. And the truth of the matter is, in life, sometimes we get to a point where our choices and decisions, we just got to man up and wrestle. If I can use that expression, woman up, however you want to say it. But we got to step up and just flat out wrestle with the realities of the choices and decisions we made, and find a path and find a way to get past them and to overcome whatever consequence or difficulty they might have brought. And so that's kind of where Jacob is. He's been this supplanter by the very definition of his name. He's been the deceiver for all this time, so he's brought some of the conflict on himself. He didn't necessarily not responsible for Laban's decisions and choices, but there's another challenge that he's going to have to overcome. And he's literally going to wrestle in chapter 32 in order to get past it. So, knows Esau's out there. So what's Jacob do in verse 3 of 32? All right, so I'm going to try to see what I can do to calm the storm here before we ever get there. So I'm going to send the messenger out before to Esau, and so he does that. And he says, "You tell Esau, thus shall ye speak. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and men servants and women servants. I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight." So is Jacob bragging? What's he doing? Okay, so I can either pay, or I'm not here to what? I'm not here to take from you. I don't need what you have. I've got everything. I've got men servants. I've got maid servants. I've got flocks. I've got everything I need. Because remember, if Esau remembers the original situation, the older will serve the younger, right? And so Esau, if he's remembering that history and the things revealed to him by God in relationship to that the older shall serve the younger, and all of a sudden the younger brother's back, then either in my mind, in Esau's mind, I can say to myself, well, either I'm going to have to serve him or fight him, right? And so Jacob wants to try to calm that. I'm not here to be served by you. I've got all I need. So don't think that that's what I've come for. Verse 7. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and herds and the camels into two bands, and said, If Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saith unto me, Return unto thy country, to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. And he talks about how he's not worthy of the blessings that God is extending, but he's praying. And he's praying. So here's an interesting circumstance. So Jacob does what with all the things he has? Family and all. Okay, divides them up. I think he does that painstakingly. I mean, you think about the idea that when he does that, and he's really in many senses convinced that Esau's going to do what? He's going to come and smite somebody. And so maybe if I get them far enough apart that he'll only be successful in smiting one of those two groups. So let me just put some distance between them. Let me separate them so that I can have the benefit from that. And so he separates them out to try to protect them from the challenges that might come. And then he has this prayer. I'm not worthy, verse 10, of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. So he doesn't think Esau will have any, what? No mercy. He's convinced when Esau comes, he won't care whether it's the women, the children, he won't care. He's just going to strike them down. And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Okay, so I'm not worthy, great humility, but also what's he say there in verse 12? I'm trusting you. I'm trusting the promise you gave me. You said, Lord, you said that the people that are going to flow from me are going to be so many, they're going to be, can't be numbered for multitude. They're going to be like the sand of the sea. And so, I think Jacob's a lot like us. I trust you, God, but I'm going to divide them up into two different spots just in case. You think about that. Isn't he a lot like us? I trust you, but just in case, I'm just going to put my own spin on it. I'm going to put my own plan on it just in case. Well, because of the covenant made to Abraham, God's going to honor what he had promised. Because he entered into a covenant relationship with Abraham that had generation after generation in mind. And so he's going to honor it because of Abraham. But Jacob doesn't have the faith. Well, let's just put that in parallel for a second. Abraham had a singular son. Jacob's father had a single son of promise. And he was ready to do what on the mount? Sacrifice the very singular one that was supposed to be bringing forth the covenant promises that were to come. Jacob has these 12 kids, right? Got these children, and he's not so sure what he's willing to give up here, and so he's ready to. I don't know if God had called upon. I don't know that Jacob has the same level of trust. And if I'm trying because I don't want to speak disparagingly. I don't want to do that in relationship to the people God used in history. But it just appears different, doesn't it? His mindset appears different than that of his grandfathers as it relates to that kind of mindset. He's more like, I trust you, but I'm going to put them in two different locations in hopes that one of them will be spared. But I appreciate his attitude. His humility is wonderful. I'm not worthy of any of this. And I'm not doubting that he believes that he has an element of faith and confidence. You made this promise, and I'm trusting in it, along with some of the decisions I'm making. Any other thoughts about that part of the history? So again, you can go back to your lesson sheets for a minute then. Because there were some questions. Question 9 asks, what assurance did Jacob have that Esau would not kill him and his children? We've been talking about that for the lesson. Well, he knew that there was somebody was going to survive, right? Because so the promises of God is what he had. The assurances that he had were the promises and covenants of God. What does 32:10 reveal about Jacob's attitude? We just spoke about. He's humble, right? I'm not worthy about that. There was some humility about him that probably took 20 years to build. Sometimes we get there later than, right? Sometimes it takes time. And sometimes some folks grasp a hold of the need to show humility towards God and that relationship pretty quickly. Others, it takes time. It took Jacob some time to kind of humble himself. Before 20 years earlier, he's a deceiver. He's a supplanter. He's using treacherous means. He's willing to deceive his own father and lie to him. He's willing to use any means possible to kind of get what he wants. But that's changed, and his disposition has changed as it relates to that. Let's go back into chapter 32 for a minute. It wasn't in your worksheets. But I want to look real quick here. Let's pick up in about verse 21, I think is where I want to be. So he went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night, and he took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons at that point, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when they saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joints as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore it is that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So he adds this, what's described as a man, whomever, angelic being, messenger of God. It's obviously somebody that is something that God has put into place for this scene and circumstance, because Jacob's conclusion at the end of it all is, I have what? I've seen God. I wrestled with God, and I wrestled with God what? All night. You ever been there? Not in the mud of the Jabbok River, but I guarantee you all of us had a sleepless night wrestling with God. Trying to decide, am I going to do what I should do? Am I going to do what's right here? Am I going to be obedient like I need to be? Am I going to build faith like I should? We've all wrestled with God. We need to be honest with that. We've all had moments in life where we're wrestling with God. We have moments of distrust. We're not so sure that I'm going to stay committed. And there are lots of sometimes sleepless nights where we wrestle with choices and decisions and commitments and covenants that we need to sustain in our relationship with God. And hopefully, through that experience, we come out different for the better. Jacob comes out different in what 2 ways? Okay, so we'll get to that one because that's the most important one. But what physically? Yeah, he's going to limp, right? He's going to limp the rest of his life. And what's going to happen as a result of that? What memorial are they going to use in relationship to that? The people that come from him won't what? From any animal. They won't eat from the sinew of the hip anymore. Yeah, they won't eat. They won't, because of this scene where Jacob comes out with this dislocated hip or whatever you want to call it. And so the people, to memorialize how Jacob had wrestled with God and didn't what? Die. You think of somebody coming into hand-to-hand combat with Jehovah, that usually doesn't turn out well for the combatant. But Jacob wrestled with God, and in this scene, neither, in a sense, in the wrestling match prevailed, but Jacob is changed. That's what God doesn't want to God doesn't want to destroy us. God doesn't want to beat us down and stand over top of us and reign victorious. God wants us to wrestle with whatever we need to wrestle with to come out the other side ready to honor Him and serve Him and be humble before Him. And so here is Jacob, changed, physically going to have a reminder of this experience, and a continual reminder because he will no longer be known as Jacob, but he will be known as Israel. Thus, from that point forward, they're going to be known as the Israelites. Now, that might seem like a kind of an elementary kind of principle, but sometimes I think we use names like that, or we say things like, well, it was the Israelites, and we don't even give thought to the idea that maybe somebody doesn't have any idea why are we calling them the Israelites. Well, there's the answer to that. The reason why they become known as the Israelites is because Jacob's name in this scene ultimately becomes named or known as Israel, and he will be changed from that point forward. Fire away. Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's I'm not trying to be semantical here, but in one context, and I think they're not parallel. I think that's the issue. I think sometimes we see those, and there's lots of those verses like that. The one minute you think, well, if that occurred, then you can't see God at all, but yet Moses sees the backside, and then you can't see His face. But Jacob says, but he doesn't say I saw the face of God, which really is the idea of seeing the essence of God, the reality of God. He said, I came face to face with God. I had a confrontation with God. I came into the immediate presence of God. I think there's a difference between the idea of coming face to face, just simply meaning it was me and God. Because the truth is, who was it in terms of the figure? He answers that. What did he say back here? In the King James, he uses the word man. Okay? And so the reality of what he physically saw was the picture of, or the representation of a man. There it is in verse 24. Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man. So what he literally saw was the figure of a man. What he actually did in the circumstance was come face to face with what he needed to be doing in his relationship with God. So he wrestles a man, a figure of a man, but that wasn't really what happened. He comes to face with his Creator, and what am I going to do in this relationship with Him? So I don't know that Jacob is trying to say, I saw the face of God. I came in confrontation with God. I saw the face of a man. I wrestled a man all night long. And I think that's the difference. Yeah, 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 yeah. And he, in the process of an all-night wrestling match, he finally realizes what am I really in here? And it's not just a confrontation between me and another human being. This is a confrontation between me and a Creator.